I wonder if I'm sure you had time to look at some of the criticism that has come in from, especially from the opposition and others, to the projections that were there in the economic survey. So to the GDP projection of 11%, the Congress and Congress leaders and even some other independent experts are saying that, it may be too optimistic. And they're also saying that, instead of just hailing it, the fact that we are also starting at a very low base, and perhaps the growth, that means the unprecedented growth, is because of the fact that we also had a contraction after 40 years. How do you respond to that? They're saying that actually the real growth is only about 3% or so.
See, firstly, I must mention that when the estimates for the first quarter had come, I remember, we had mentioned that there is a V-shaped recovery that was
Yes.
on. And we were, this was, at that time, only the first quarter's estimate had come. 23.9% was the decline. And I do remember, one specific channel asking me, CEA, do you know that on social media there are all kinds of associations of your name with all kinds of alphabets that is being made, which sort of captured the doubt that was expressed at that point in time, whether or not the V-shaped recovery that we were predicting would indeed manifest or not. I think that's understandable. The job of people like us is to actually see beyond what is the obvious, and that's why my office tracks close to 60 high frequency indicators, 58 indicators to be precise, and based on that, based on such data, we actually make our estimation. And the other thing, I think one has to be humble enough to admit that these are estimations, and none of us is an astrologer. We make estimations based on what we see in the data. I think, but that does give me confidence to actually tell you that that the 11% projection that we have made is something that is certainly achievable. Overall, I think despite the decline, and by the way, I must also mention that when people make this observation that the decline has happened for the first time in 40 years, do keep in mind that we've actually encountered a pandemic that is a once in a century event. So, I think, without that particular context, it just seems, a little clever to not mention the context, and especially, if you go and read the June edition of the World Economic Outlook, it had highlighted that for the first time in 150 years, there is going to be a decline in GDP per capita among the largest number of countries, for the first time in 150 years. Such kind of things actually are happening because of a pandemic. So I think, it is important to keep that in mind. The pandemic in and itself, would have had, even if, and this is a counterfactual exercise, even if there was no lockdown, for instance, and I genuinely believe that the outcomes would have been far worse than what they actually what they transpired. But even if there was no lockdown, if we basically had just continued, as things were, the locals were running in Mumbai, all of us traveling in buses, everything, let's say, of course, the pandemic would have spread like wildfire.
And when we talk about steps by the government, you would, of course, agree that a lot of the, and this is something the finance minister has spoken of as well, is that the government's help and the package, it came mostly in the form of offering easier loans. Now, many would argue, and what opposition, and many economists have said, is that perhaps what helps people much more and what helps the economy much more is to give cash to the poor. Now, and that there is less of an appetite for loans or for credit. What would you say to that criticism?
Again, I think, the Indian response was far more based on foundational economic principles, which is that when there is uncertainty, households do not go and spend on discretionary items. And we showed evidence in the economic survey, and I actually had mentioned this while it was happening, that the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana balances, for instance, increased by 500 rupees. Now remember, actually these are 40 crore households that are at the bottom of the pyramid, for whom typically they earn one additional rupee, they end up spending almost the entire of it. And it is in that section that the savings increase, which means consumption was not happening. This is also backed by research from the advanced economies, where the checks that were being mailed were being used only for food items, which actually, by the way, India took care through the PDS. 80 crore free household individuals were basically given free food, by far the largest free food program. So if you look at the Indian demand side response, it was based on a very commonsensical, principle. What I mean here is, when the restrictions were there on economic activities, people wouldn't have gone to restaurants or done discretionary spending. So it would have only wasted fiscal space. But once the unlock was was happening, that's when discretionary spending actually was focused upon. And here I must highlight the Atmanirbhar Bharat 3 package actually focused on a wage subsidy program to actually encourage more jobs to come back. And last but certainly not the least, if you look at the capital expenditure spending by the government, and this is something which you've highlighted, in the month of October, on a month-on-month basis, capital expenditure by the government went up 60%. In the next month, November, on the higher base of October, it went up another 160% on a higher base. So I think that the demand side policies actually have been based on very, very strong principles, to make sure that that fiscal space, not even a rupee is wasted. Even people like Joseph Stiglitz actually wrote about the advanced economies that you are just spending as if there is no tomorrow, and this may actually come back to bite you.